So, Jiva, another part of programming that seems to come up always, and it doesn't matter almost what application you're writing, is having to deal with sort of dates and times and calendars and things like that. So, what support does Foundation give us in this area?
You know, dates are kind of traditionally a really difficult thing to deal with in programming. I think a lot of people don't really fully appreciate just how complicated calendars are, because not only do you have things like leap year, right, but you've got daylight savings time that you have to take into account for, and of course not everybody actually follows daylight savings time, right? So some time zones do, some time zones don't, like the one I live in, Arizona, does not. Things like that. So you've got that. Not only that, but as you look at different times in history, right, different calendars have been in use, whether it's the Julian calendar or whatever, you know. Not only that, but there's also different cultures that use different calendars. Like there's the Chinese calendar. Apparently there's a Jewish calendar. There's all kinds of different calendars. Before I got into working with computers, I had no idea that there were all these different kinds of calendar issues, frankly.
A calendar was just something you hung on the wall.
Exactly. Not only that, but of course, you know, most traditional computer systems kind of deal with dates in a sort of naive way, in that they just sort of count the number of seconds since 1970, you know, January 1st or something like that. So anyway, so we're really lucky in that Objective-C provides us with, or Foundation provides us with, a really robust and excellent set of date and calendar classes. And it's sort of a suite of classes. We're going to look at them, and we're going to kind of, you know, give a general overview of all of them together. So let's take a look at how we create a date in Objective-C. So again, you know, we're back here in our example application, and here's where we just go ahead and we create this date called date. And when you use the date factory method, you'll be creating a date that is the current date and time. So here we're doing NSDate date, and that should actually get us the current date and time. So if I were to run this, I'd actually get the current date and time printing out.
Okay.
Beneath that, I've got another example where we're actually using an NSDate formatter. Now, the NSDate formatter is really pretty cool because it enables you to essentially use natural language processing with dates. So if you had a date, like we're going to do here, and you said that you want to format it in a particular style so you get a particular form back, then that will give you the ability to get a string back that matches that format for that date. It's kind of a big deal. So, for example, I mean, if you wanted to have this formatted for European-style dates versus American-style dates and those kinds of things, you use the NSDate formatter for that. So, you know, just to give you an example, just to show you how this runs. So typically, the standard description method for the NSDate class is going to give you that kind of long form with the year first, then the month, then the day, and then the time in hours, minutes, and seconds, including the adjustment for your time zone, whatever that may be. But then remember, when we use that NSDate formatter, right, I specified that I wanted the NSDate formatter short style, which will give me just month, date, and year, which is exactly what we got here on this second line.
Now, as you said, people format dates differently in different places. So does NSDate formatter short style always give you it in that format, or does it give you it in what would be generally considered the short format for dates on that machine for that internationalization of
localized version of that date format, right?
If that was running on my machine right here, because we're
Yes.
sat in the UK,
Yes.
I would get the proper way of doing dates, day,
Depending on your perspective.
day, month, year, as
Exactly.
opposed to the wrong way of doing days, month, day, year.
Depending on your perspective, yes.
Good.
So let's take a look at some more examples of that, of how we work with dates.
But that's good because that internationalizes our application almost. I know there's far more.
There's a
work
lot
than that.
more to internationalization.
But
than that,
the point
yes.
is with dates, if we use different format styles, they'll be displayed in a way that's appropriate to the person who's using the application.
Right. Now, so, let's take a look at some typical factory methods that we would use with these dates. Again, I just showed you the NSDate factory method basically returns now. It returns the current date right out to minutes, hours, and seconds. You can also create dates by manipulating what are called time intervals. And time intervals are essentially measured in seconds, right? And so you can pass, and it's defined as an NS time interval, and it's really just an NS integer, essentially. And you can use this. So, for example, here I'm saying take now, the current time, and create a new date for me by adding the time interval negative 3600, which is 3600 seconds ago. Mm-hmm. So in other words, this will yield, 3600 is an hour in seconds, this will yield 1 hour ago as far as a new NS date. Important point, of course, is negative values will give you a value in the past. Positive values as a time interval will give you values in the future, as we see here with this creation of this an hour from now NS date. We're taking now and we're adding a new time interval to that of 3600, but in this case it's a positive time interval, so this is 1 hour in the future, right? Now you can also take two numbers or two dates, and you can find out what the time interval is between them by using the method time interval since date. Mm-hmm. And the way that works is you take one date, and that will be the date that you're going to call the method on, and then you call the method time interval since date, and then you pass another method or another date, and that will return an NS time interval that gives you the difference between those two dates.
And if it was, does it give you the difference always as a positive number, or is it sometimes negative?
It's going to depend on which one you're calling it on and which one you're passing. If the time that you're calling it on is, this is really hard to explain.
Later then?
If it's later than the time that you're passing, then you'll get a positive number. If it's earlier than the time that you're passing, you'll get a negative number. Got to make sure I got those.
Okay. So basically it says, I have my date, I'm giving it another date, and it says, okay, from this date here, where did I fit?
Exactly.
Minus or plus.
Exactly. Now, some other stuff you can do is, for example, there's another method on NSDate called later date, which will return to you. Again, it's called on one of your two dates. You've got two dates. You're going to call it on one of your two dates, and you're going to pass the other date to this method. It's a little bit like working with an is equals method. But in this case, you're going to say, which of these is later? And what's actually going to happen is it's actually going to return whichever one of those two dates was the later date.
It's the later date, yeah.
So in this particular case, right, now is a later date than an hour ago, so we get back the value or the object now. Similarly, there's an earlier date method as well. So you've got, just like with the later date, you have a date, you pass another date to the earlier date method, and it will return whichever one is earlier. So in this case, we've got now and an earlier date an hour ago. It's going to return an hour ago, right? Finally, there's also comparisons that you can do. So, for example, this is used especially in cases where you want to, say, for example, sort an NS array based on time or something like that. It'll use the compare method on dates. And it works just like the previous ones in that, you have a date and you pass another date to this method, compare, and it will actually return an NS sort order value. And in this case, it'll say that they are ascending if the time that's passed is earlier than the time that you're calling the method on, and vice versa if it's the other way around.
It takes a little bit to get in your head.
It
now,
does.
doesn't it? But
It
it says, I guess one of the ways to compare that one again is to say, you're calling a method of a date, and so that's your central date, and so you're saying, so that date is in effect saying, where am I in relation to what I'm being passed?
Exactly. Now, NSDate is really kind of it's the linchpin of the whole Objective-C Foundation date and calendaring system. I mean, without NSDate, you wouldn't have anything else, basically. But there's definitely some other classes there that offer a tremendous amount of support to NSDate for manipulating lots of things. For example, let's take a look at NS Calendar. So NS Calendar allows you to manipulate dates using calendars. So like I said, there's cases where there's like Julian calendars, and there's Jewish calendars, and there's Japanese calendars, and things like that. And what you can do is you can create a calendar. You can ask for a particular calendar, and you can pass it a date, and then you can convert that calendar to something else and get a date back out, and it'll give you the corrected date for that other calendar. So that's one way to use NS Calendar. Another way that's perhaps a little bit more common, this is one that I've actually been bitten on, is when you're working with dates, it can be really tempting to put these little hard-coded things into your code. For example, I have one of my applications needs to do a reset once a week on the same day. So I at one time in my code was doing this little check where I would check to see if I was 7 days worth of time intervals from the previous check and take an action based off of that. Now, the problem is that would be inaccurate twice a year. Mm-hmm. Daylight savings time, when it changed from daylight savings time and back and forth. Because what would wind up happening is those weeks are shorter, or longer, depending on whether you're jumping forward or springing forward or falling back. Right? So one of the cool ways that you can use NS Calendar is you can use this class called NSDate Components, okay? And you can use NS Calendar, and you can manipulate you can say, okay, I'm going to create a date. I'm going to create a calendar, and I'm going to use a date with that calendar. And then I'm going to get the components out of that calendar. For example, here we have the current calendar where we're getting date from components. In this case, we've actually created a particular components object using the month 12, the day 25, and the year 2010.
You've forgotten to actually put the components in the call there.
Did I? Where?
Date from components is the method and requires the parameter.
You're absolutely right. I sure did.
It's okay.
I knew there was something missing there. I kept looking at it. I kept going, why doesn't this relate? Okay.
There we are. Just for completeness, so people get that.
So what's happened here is I've created a components object, an NSDate components object, and I've initialized it with month 12, day 25, year 2010. So this is representing December 25th, 2010. And then I'm getting the current calendar, and then I'm creating a date from that using date from components. And so that's going to get me a date of 12/25/2010.
As in an NSDate format.
As an NSDate format. And then I can do all the cool things that I did before with NSDate. Now, let's say that I actually wanted to then say a week before that week. If I just use a NS time interval, if that was a daylight savings time week, which of course it's not, but if it was, then that would actually not be accurate. But if I use the NSDate component's week component and take that value and subtract 1 week from it, then it will do all the proper adjustments for me, including for daylight savings time or even leap year or any of those kinds of things.
We could take a year off, we could take 3 weeks off, we could do whichever with this, manipulate it in those units.
Exactly. Then I can come back again and say calendar, date with components with this new component, and I can get another date out of there that says 1 week before Christmas. That is, in fact, 1 week before Christmas.
So this, we're talking with dates here, but this also will go into time as well, which I know we're not covered time
Yes.
yet, but the date components will cover all the elements, so I could add 2 hours.
Exactly. The date components class has, essentially, the date components class encapsulates all of the different components of dates. So hours, minutes, seconds, year, day, month, all of those different pieces. And you can create these components using an arbitrary setting for any of those. Then you can manipulate each one of those components individually, like I did here with this components week, and you can add 1 or 2 to it. So it enables you to actually work with dates in a way that's much more natural, I think, for how we think about things. I don't think about things and think, I need a week's worth of NS time intervals. Well, okay, I did once. But typically when I'm dealing with dates on a day-to-day basis, I'm thinking a month ago or a week ago or, a year ago.
And it contains lots of other useful information like day of week.
Yes, exactly.
So that you can realize that this day is the 3rd day of the week, so if I want the 1st day of the next week, I only need to add 4 days and all this sort of stuff.
Exactly. So that's how you work with, so that's the NS date components class. And like I said, you can use that with the calendar to create and manipulate dates sort of arbitrarily. There's also the NS time zone class, which you can use with that components class. So for example, if you wanted to convert a time from one time zone to another, you can create a calendar, for example, and you can set the time zone on it. And then you can then get the components out of that using the current date. And then you can get the converted hours for the appropriate time zone that you've set by using the hour components off of the components that you got from the current date, from the current local date.
Right, okay.
So in other words, normally, right, this is your current calendar with your time zone in it. But in this case, I've actually created, say, for example, a Pacific time zone using the NS time zone class. And by setting the time zone then on that calendar, then I can use it to get the components out of the calendar. And then from that, I can get the updated hour for Pacific time for right now.
Okay.
Now, the NS time zone class has a class method on it that will actually allow you to get all of the abbreviations for all of the time zones, so you can display them if you want. It also has long names for all of the time zones as well. And you can construct an NS time zone class using either the abbreviation like I've done here, or there's another constructor that lets you construct a time zone using the full length name as well. So you could do like, America / Pacific Standard Time, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about formatters, because formatters are pretty cool, and they let you do that conversion between NS dates and strings, basically. So just kind of looking at how we use those formatters, I showed how we use this formatter early on. That was that first example. We have a date, and we can create a formatter, and then we can set the date style on that formatter to be NS date formatter short style or NS date formatter long style.
And there's a whole range of those.
There's a whole range of them, and just look at the documentation. But here's kind of an idea of some of the choices you have here. You've got short style and medium style and long style, and it actually will show you down here each of the different styles here and what they'll actually map out to and so forth when you're actually working with these. Now it also goes the other way too. So you can take a formatter, and let's say that you've got an entry box where you're doing you're allowing the user to just enter the date or time into this entry box, and you need to convert that into an actual date. Well, you can create an NS date formatter, and you can set the date format style to whatever you are restricting them to in your input, and then you can use that formatter then to use the method date from string, and that will actually give you an NS date from whatever string that you've passed, as long as it matches that format.
Right, so you're telling it what the format style this is going to be in, then using the formatter to go back to a date as opposed to the other way around.
Right, exactly. Now, it's also possible to actually do custom date formatters. I don't have an example of that here, but I've used that in the past to do things like, sort of scrunch my dates all together into one big fat string so that I could use them, for example, for ordering in SQL tables. It's kind of a convenient way to use an NSDate formatter to do that. Now, one caveat that I've run into, surprisingly enough, constructing an NSDate formatter is actually expensive. I've noticed I have more than once made the mistake of writing a tight loop and having an NSDate formatter created in that loop, and it's really killed the performance of my application. So an NSDate formatter might be something that you might want to create as part of constructing your object early on and kind of keep it around.
Yeah, I mean, it's doing a lot of work here. I mean, it's... I remember I was doing an application, it involved lots and lots of working on date calculations and looking at date things, and it was doing lots of things with NSDate components. And again, working with date components is quite expensive, especially on the phone.
Right. Exactly. That's where my problem is too.
Which is why, sometimes adding that number of seconds and being done with it, which is basically an integer calculation, especially in a tight loop, but realizing occasionally you're going to be out by an hour, is still an option if performance is everything, because once you begin to do anything with components or these formatters, especially in loops, it's I'm not saying it's slow, but it's a lot slower than just pure integer maths.
Right.
So it's great. That's dates.
Dates.
Wow. So you want to know what comes next? I'll tell you what, we'll keep it a secret. They'll have to watch.
Bye.